كلية الفقه الحنفي تقدم.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. So inshallah today we will be finishing off the little bits of the part before the next particular discussion that comes about from Ibn Abidin, where over here he simply mentions regarding what happens when there are different opinions mentioned in the books of the Zawahir, in the books of the Zahir al-Riwayah, the manifest transmissions. Then what do? He mentions this over here quite clearly. We've covered this a little bit, but we'll just make sure we tackle this from how Ibn Abidin tackles it. Then he goes on to mention some praise and some discussion regarding Hakim Shahid's Al-Kafi, and then he also mentions the sharh of this Kafi of Allama Sarakhsi, the famous Hanafi scholar. He wrote a Mabsut al-Sarakhsi, which was meant to be a sharh of the Kafi, or which is the sharh of the Kafi. So he goes on to discussing these in detail, mentioning regarding what scholars have mentioned in relation to the Kafi. I will shed some light on this according to what research has been done recently, and the recent scholars of our time have kind of agreed with this as well. Many of them, after reading everything, have come to the same conclusion. So we'll shed some light regarding this as well. Then he just goes on to mention a little bio of Hakim al-Shahid. So we'll just quickly go through that. Then we move on to the next part of the poem of Ibn Abidin, where he then mentions that regarding a mujtahid having various opinions being attributed to that mujtahid, what happens in that scenario? How do you, how do you navigate when there are various opinions that are attributed to, for example, Imam Abu Hanifa? There's this opinion and there's also another opinion. Sometimes there's more than one opinion, two opinions, three opinions sometimes. So then how do you navigate here? What do you do? So the working of how the scholars would have, in essence, worked it out to get to the conclusion that today we have, he explains this. So we will go through that, inshallah. And he will also mention the reasons why there are different transmissions from, or different opinions transmitted from a mujtahid. So he will explore this, inshallah, and we will discuss this today, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So now we start off continuing on what we were discussing in our last session. Ibn Abidin finishes this particular discussion off by saying, in essence, the point of the differences that would be found in amongst the Zawahir. So if there is a mas'ala that's mentioned in the Zahir al-Riwayah, so there's a mention of it in Kitab al-Asl, but there's also a mention of it in one of the later books, like, for example, As-Siyar al-Saghir. Then the ruling which is mentioned in a later book will get preference over the ruling mentioned in the earlier book. I already mentioned this, but Ibn Abidin, he discusses this over here. And he also quotes here from Allama Biri from the Sharh of Al-Ashbah al-Nadha'ir. He says, Allama Biri mentions that our scholars, they say, meaning the fuqaha of the Hanafiya, they say that if there is a difference of opinion in a particular ruling, then the best thing and the chosen thing is that the mujtahid, if there's a person who's mujtahid, he will look at the evidences and he will look at which evidence according to him is the preferred one. So meaning which evidence, which ruling has more evidence, and it will prefer the opinion that is backed by more evidence. But a muqallid, not the mujtahid, a person who's just following because they don't have the level of ijtihad now, he will take whatever is later authored. And obviously he says that is the siyar in comparison to all of the other books, right? Unless, of course, the mashayikh, the later scholars, have clearly preponderated another opinion that was probably mentioned in the earlier books. Then he says it will be necessary to do amal upon that, to practice, to give fatwa on that, to practice upon that as well, even if it be the qawl of Imam, the opinion of Imam Zufar rahimahullah, he says. So because there are certain rulings, we'll pray this later, upon which Imam Zufar rahmatullahi alayhi's opinion, the fatwa in our school, has been given. So this is the last part that Ibn Abdin just finishes off with. Then he goes on to the next part of his nazm, of his poem. He says, وَيَجْمَعُ السِّتَّ كُتُبْ كِتَابُ الْكَافِي لِلْحَاكِمِ الشَّهِيدِ فَهُوَ الْكَافِي, and gathers these six, as we discussed, he describes them as six of the books of Zahir Riwayat, so no problem, according to him it's six. So gathers these six, the Kitab of Kafi, belonging to the author of which is Hakim al-Shahid, which is sufficient, which suffices us in essence. So apparently so, Hakim al-Shahid, he gathered all the masail of the Zahir Riwayah in his book called Al-Kafi. It says, أقوى شرحه الذي كالشمس مبسوط شمس الأئمة السرخسي. The strongest or the most famous, you can say, of its commentaries, commentary of Kafi, is like the strongest, like the sun, is the commentary of Mabsut, the commentary of Mabsut, which is the belonging to which the author of which is Shamsul A'imma Sarkhsi, or Sarkhasi, as some people have pronounced. And he says, المعتمد النقول ليس يعمل بخلافه وليس عنه يعدل. It's relied upon in terms of transmission. It wouldn't be done amal upon, practice wouldn't be done on something contrary to it. Whatever's mentioned in it, you won't practice upon what's contrary to it, and you won't turn away from, we would say, from it. So from what's mentioned in here, you won't be turning away from, because apparently this was meant to be the summary, and say, of all of the six books, the Zahir Riwayah as such, in our school. We'll see whether this is the case now. So in Fathul Qadir, he mentions, Ibn al-Humam, he mentions that the Kitab Kafi of Hakim Shahid, huwa jam'u kalami Muhammad. It's a gathering, amalgamation of the statements of Imam Muhammad rahmatullahi, the discussions of Imam Muhammad rahmatullahi, apparently of the six books of Imam Muhammad rahmatullahi alayhi. And in the Sharh of Ashbah, again by Ibrahim al-Biri, Allama Ibrahim al-Biri, he mentions that from the books of the Masail al-Usul, the Masail al-Usul is obviously the apparently so the Masail of the original books, the six original books, apparently so here, is Kitabul Kafi, belonging to Hakim al-Shahid. Hakim Shahid is Abu al-Fadl Muhammad bin Muhammad al-Marwazi al-Balkhi. He's known famously as Hakim Shahid. He passed away in 334, which we'll talk about later, because Ibn Abdin mentions about him a bit more. So he says that is, which is quoting from what Allama Biri mentions, he says that is a kitab which is relied upon in transmission of the madhab, and its sharh, did sharh of it, a whole group of scholars did sharh of it, and from amongst whom there is Shamsul A'imma Sarakhsi, and that is famously known as Mabsut as-Sarakhsi. And Shaykh Ismail Nabulusi mentions that Allama Tarsusi mentions These are all famous scholars of the Hanafi school, and they mentioned that the Mabsut of Imam Sarakhsi, you wouldn't go against what's mentioned there, and we won't rely upon anything else when there is something written in the Mabsut of Sarakhsi. So he's giving Mabsut of Sarakhsi a very high caliber status in the madhab, and fatwa will not be given to something which is contrary to it, nor will be turned to something else, leaving this out. Then we have Qadi Taqiyuddin Tamimi, his 1005 death date. In his Tabaqat, he mentions some, what do you call poetry. He makes some mentions on poetry in praise of the Mabsut of Allama Sarakhsi. He says, عليك بمبسوط السرخسي إنه هو البحر والدر الفريد مسائله ولا تعتمد إلا عليه فإنه يجاب بإعطاء الرغائب سائله. So meaning you should hold on to Mabsut al-Sarakhsi, you should look at it, because it's like an ocean, it's a unique pearl, its masail are unique pearls, and you won't be relied upon, you don't rely upon except what's in it. And وَلَا تُعْتَمَدْ إِلَّا عَلَيْهِ فَإِنَّهُ يُجَابُ, because it will give a person who wishes to find something, the questioner, it will give you a gift, basically. It'll give you what you are looking for, what you are finding. So Mabsut al-Sarakhsi, they're praising a lot. Obviously, it is definitely praiseworthy in terms of what Allama Sarakhsi has mentioned in the Mabsut, a lot of masail. He then, Ibn Abdin, mentions regarding a quote from Shaykh Hibatullah al-Ba'li in his Sharh upon the Ashbah. He mentions that the Mabsut of the Imam al-Kabir, Muhammad bin Muhammad ibn Abi al-Sahl al-Sarakhsi, he is one of the great Imams, the Fuqaha of Usul. So he says that that other scholars, they held on to, like Shamsul Abdul Aziz al-Hulwani, they held on to the Mabsut of Sarakhsi, meaning they studied it so much that they became like the most learned of the scholars of their time, the ones who had the best opinions, and they even wrote their own Mabsuts. Okay, so there were many other scholars that wrote their own Mabsuts, and Imam Allama Sarakhsi, who wrote his Mabsut as well, he's famously known to have written his Mabsut whilst he was imprisoned. So there was something that happened in his time. There's many incidents that are mentioned as to what happened in his time, and the ruler of his time, in essence, became upset with him for some certain reasons. Some people have said that some people they spread some mischief regarding him to the Sultan, to the king, because of which Allama Sarakhsi was imprisoned. And then the books that he had were all taken away from him as well. So then he was forced to recall upon memory. So students would come to try seek knowledge from him, and he would dictate to them masail, and in essence he wrote or dictated to them the Mabsut from memory. So the whole of the Mabsut al-Sarakhsi, he in essence from memory was able to, mashallah, get it dictated upon his students. So he passed away in the year 490. So this is Allama Sarakhsi, very much praiseworthy, the work that he did in terms of trying to write a sharh of the Kafi that Hakim al-Shahid wrote. And apparently, so what Ibn Abidin is mentioning here, that Hakim Shahid's Kafi is a summary of the books of the Zahir al-Riwayah. Now, in terms of when we look at the book of Imam Hakim al-Shahid, the Kitab al-Kafi, we see that it's actually not a summary of all the 6 books, where some people described it to be a book that gathered the Masail al-Usul. What they meant was that he gathered the Masail of Kitab al-Asl, the Imam Muhammad's first kitab, which I've indicated earlier too anyway, that Hakim Shahid in Kitab al-Kafi, he gathered, he did a mukhtasar, he summarized in essence all of Imam Muhammad's, the kutub, like Kitab al-Tahara, Kitab al-Salah, Kitab al-Hajj, Kitab al-Zakat, and so on, which were formulated the Kitab al-Asl. So he summarized it all in Kitab al-Kafi. So his was a summary of Kitab al-Asl. And obviously the Mabsut al-Sarakhsi, in essence, is a sharh of Kitab in essence, indirectly, Kitab al-Asl's sharh. That's the reason why it's not like the go-to book, Mabsut. It would have been, if you think about it, that why, because then the question is, why is it not the go-to book for the madhab? Meaning that should be because it contains all of the masail of Zahir Riwayah and the sharh of it, apparently so. But clearly it doesn't, okay? And it's not the go-to book, although it is very much relied upon. Definitely, it's a relied upon book. But it's not like the go-to book that whatever's found in there, that's it. It trumps everything else. That's not the case. And in practice as well, those people who practice fiqh will know that that's not the case. So this is the what is called the research. And as I've indicated earlier too, if whoever wants to can research this and read about this further in detail in the Asbab al-Udul al-Hanafiyya of Allama al-Way, and he mentions that it's on page 58. If anyone wants to read further, he mentions that Ibn Abdin here, he's made a mistake, and the mistake he made was he relied upon what Bahr mentioned. So what Al-Bahr al-Ra'iq mentioned, that the Kafi is a summary, amalgamation, a jama' of the 6 books. He relied upon that, and he didn't actually go and check it for because if he checked it for himself, he would have seen that that is not the case, where Kafi is not a sharh of all these, a mukhtasar summary of all the 6 books. So that's one thing out of the way, we've understood. Then Ibn Abidin goes on to mention that just as he was saying that the Mabsut, many people wrote Mabsuts, so he goes on to list different people who wrote Mabsuts, saying Imam Abu Yusuf had a Mabsut. As we know, Imam Muhammad definitely had a Mabsut called Kitab al-Asl. He mentions Mabsut al-Jurjani, but again here there is a dispute that it shouldn't be Mabsut al-Jurjani, it should be Mabsut al-Juzajani. So if anyone is following along in the book, then here should be Juzajani, because the original Makhtut actually has Juzajani written. So then Allama Khwaharzada, who is 483 death date, he also has a Mabsut. Then Shamsul A'imma al-Hulwani, who is 448 death date, he's also got a Mabsut. Then Abu Yusr Bazdawi, Allama Bazdawi, he's 493, he's got a Mabsut. Then his brother Ali al-Bazdawi, who's 482, he also has a Mabsut. And Sayyid Nasiruddin Samarqandi, who's 556, has also a Mabsut. And lastly, he mentions Abu Layth Nasr bin Muhammad, who's 373, quite early, and he also has a Mabsut. So he mentions that all of these people had Mabsuts, and but where Mabsut is mentioned on its own, just Mabsut, so this is mentioned in the Mabsut, then it will refer to Mabsut al-Sarakhsi. Okay, so where they want to refer to Kitab al-Asl, Imam Muhammad's kitab, they won't refer to it as Mabsut anymore. So they will just say that this is how it's found in Kitab al-Asl. Because if they say Mabsut, it'll get confusing. Now, which Mabsut, which one are you talking about? So they'll either say Mabsut of Imam Muhammad, then obviously it means the Kitab al-Asl. But if they say just Mabsut on its own, then it'll be referring to the Mabsut of Imam Sarakhsi. So anyway, it's a sharh of the Kafi, as we understood, and the Kafi is, it mentions now that it's of Hakim Shahid, is a big scholar. It tells us this Muhammad bin Ahmad bin Abdullah. he was entrusted to be the judge of Bukhara. Then the Amir made him in charge of Khurasan, and he heard ahadith from many scholars, and he gathered, apparently so here, he gathered the books of Imam Muhammad and summarized it, which he says that Allama Dhahabi has mentioned it, and he has also praised it. So this is what he has mentioned. Then he mentions that Hakim al-Naysaburi, who's 405 death date, he mentions in Tarikh Naysaburi, basically, he mentions that I have not seen in and amongst who I wrote from the students of Imam Abu Hanifa, somebody who is, meaning from amongst the Hanafis, somebody who's more preserving of hadith and who's more guided towards the methodology and is more understanding of Imam Sab than him, meaning than Hakim Shahid. And he passed away. The reason why he was famously known as Hakim Shahid, because he passed away in Sajda. He passed away in Sajda. He was martyred in Sajda, in essence. And he passed away. He was martyred in the Rabi'ul Awwal, according to what's mentioned in Tajut Tarajim of Allama Qasim Kutlubugha, and was mentioned in other books like the Sulam al-Wusul ila Tabaqat al-Fuhul of Haji Khalifa, and also in the Jawahir al-Mudiyya of Muhyiddin Abdul Qadir al-Qurashi. He mentions that it's Rabi'ul Akhar or Rabi'ul Thani in the year, as I explained already, in the year 334. But so there's a difference of opinion whether it's Rabi'ul Awwal or Rabi'ul Akhar, no problem, whichever way it is. But this is the summary, in essence, of a little bit of detail that Ibn Abdin mentions regarding Hakim al-Shahid. He lastly finishes off the discussion mentioning that Hakim Shahid had many other books too. So Hakim Shahid had a Mukhtasar, meaning another book, not the Mukhtasar Kafi that we're talking about, because Kafi is known as Kafi. It is a Mukhtasar, it's called Al-Mukhtasar Al-Kafi, but because he had another Mukhtasar, Hakim Shahid, Mukhtasar Al-Hakim, so that's why it would get confusing which one we're talking about. So that's why the Kafi was called Al-Kafi, and the Mukhtasar, the other one, was called Al-Mukhtasar, known as. And then he had other books like Al-Muntaqa Al-Isharat, there's another book, وغيرها. So why he discusses this is because some people have had a bit of a confusion here. So he's clarifying this confusion by saying that when Allama Sarakhsi mentions, because Allama Sarakhsi is doing the sharh of Kafi, right? So when he mentions Ra'aytu, I saw the correct thing, the correct masla in the compilation of the Sharh al-Mukhtasar, the Sharh of the Mukhtasar. This doesn't indicate, he says, upon that Mabsut is a Sharh of the Mukhtasar and not a Sharh of the Kafi, because some people have understood that the Mabsut is actually a Sharh of the Mukhtasar of Imam of Hakim Shahid, not a Sharh of the Kafi. But that's wrong, that's incorrect, because Mabsut is in fact the Sharh of Kafi. So the reason being is because Al-Kafi was also known, like I said to you, as the Mukhtasar. So because, like I said, he tried to summarize apparently the Zahir riwayat, but like I told you correctly, that he summarized the Kitab al-Asl of Imam Muhammad rahmatullahi alayhi. Now there are to prove this, to back his statement here, that he says that there are many transmissions of the Kafi from Hakim Shahid's Kafi mentioned in Ghayatul Bayan. Ghayatul Bayan is a sharh of the famous Hidayah of Allama Marghinani. Obviously, I don't think it's around in our time. Ghayatul Bayan, it's not around in our time. It was a book of Amir Katib al-Itqani, Hanafi scholar, 758. So he was one of the leading Hanafi scholars in his time, and a great scholar. So he wrote a sharh on the Hidayah, Ghayatul Bayan. And in that sharh, he quotes a lot from the Kafi of Hakim Shahid. And the way he quotes it, he says, قال الحاكم الشهيد في مختصره. So any Hakim Shahid says in his Mukhtasar, and then he says Al-Musamma bil-Kafi, which is also named Al-Kafi. So he clearly states that the Kafi is also called a Mukhtasar in essence. So when Mabsut is saying Mukhtasar of Hakim Shahid, he is referring to the Kafi and not the other Mukhtasar. So anyway, that's a little bit of a clarification that Ibn Abidin mentions over here, just to make sure that people know what's happening. If they ever read these books, then what is it referring to? So this is what Ibn Abidin ends off this discussion on, in his attempt to give us an understanding of what the Kafi is, and in essence what the sharh of the Kafi of Allama Sarakhsi is. No doubt these books are relied upon. It's a good books to check as well, but do not think that this is the book which gathers all of the dhalahir. That's not what you're going to get here. Now, we move on to the next part of the poem, the nazm that Ibn Abidin has mentioned for the Rasmul Mufti. He says, وَعْلَمْ بِأَنَّ أَنْ أَبِي حَنِيفَةَ جَاءَتْ رِوَايَاتْ غَدَتْ مُنْفِيَةً. So he says that, know that from Imam Abu Hanifa there are different transmissions that have become an abundance, have become a lot. There's a lot of transmissions that have come about from Imam Abu Hanifa. وَاخْتَارَ مِنْهَا بَعْضَهَا وَالْبَاقِي يَخْتَارُ مِنْهُ سَائِرُ الرِّفَاقِ. So he chose from them some. So he mentions many aqwal, many statements. Imam Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi, he mentioned many opinions. So he chose one or some. And the remaining opinions that he had mentioned, the rest of the students chose. So Imam Yusuf, he liked one opinion, so he chose that. Imam Muhammad, he liked this opinion, he chose that. Imam Zufar, he liked that opinion, so he chose that, like this. فَلَمْ يَكُنْ لِغَيْرِهِ جَوَابُ كَمَا عَلَيْهِ أَقْسَمَ الْأَصْحَابُ. So there is not for anybody besides Imam Hanifa any opinion. Jawab means an opinion, just as upon it the students have taken oaths, meaning the students of Imam Hanifa have stated that whatever we say, whatever opinion we have, was something we heard from Imam Abu Hanifa himself, meaning Imam Hanifa mentioned these different opinions. Not necessarily him choosing that opinion, but just him mentioning the various different opinions, and then the students would then choose an opinion based on various reasons, which will then come later. So this part of the poem now, Ibn Abidin goes and expounds upon over here. So the first thing he discusses that can a mujtahid have various opinions? So he first states a transmission from majority of the ulama, majority of the scholars of the books of usul. He says that the scholars of usul, they mention that it's not valid in one mas'ala for a mujtahid to have different opinions which are both attributed to him, because then there would be a contradiction. Why? Because a mujtahid would be saying one thing, not saying both things. How can he be saying everything? How can two opposing opinions be both his opinions? If something is fard, or if something is sunnah, or if something is wajib, or something is makruh, what is it? So you can't have different attributions towards the imam. Or if something is pure or something is impure, which one is it? You can't have both opinions from the mujtahid. He would only be attributed to him would only be one opinion. So then the ulama of the books of usul are then stating, therefore, the later one, whatever it's known to be the later opinion that's attributed to the mujtahid, that will become the retracted upon opinion. That's the opinion that this mujtahid would have retracted upon. So that's the first job to work out, in essence. amongst the various opinions there may be attributed to a mujtahid, that which one of them was the one that he went with last. So that's the job, and that's the way we will preponderate in essence first. Otherwise, if we don't know which one was the final opinion, then the mujtahid fil madhab in essence, they will preponderate. It will be necessary basically for them to look into the mas'ala, and they will in essence give a siding towards this one or that opinion. So Imam Yusuf, for example, will go with this one, though he's higher than Mujtahid fil madhab, but you get the idea that the idea is that these scholars who would come along and they will prefer a certain opinion, like is in various books of the Hanafi books, he says. Now, then he says that some of the usul, the scholars of usul, they then mention that if we can't find a clear preponderance as well, then what do we do next? So we looked in the books, we looked at the scholars, and there's no preponderance towards this opinion or that opinion, and we can't find out. Firstly, we already tried to work out which one is the later opinion, so we can't work that out. Nor is there preponderance clear from this side or that side, or there's a balance, there's an equal balance. Some are saying this or some are saying that. Then what do we do? So he says, if the person in question is a mujtahid, if they have a level of ijtihad, then they will look into the evidences and they will then practice that which they feel as though they feel content upon. And if the person is not a mujtahid but is a general other person that is a follower, generally a muqallid, then they have to follow the fatwa of a scholar who is knowledgeable and who can be trusted, who is and got that knowledge to be able to preponderate, who's got taqwa and things, right? So he will follow that, and he will follow a ruling which is generally ruling which is more cautious. So if we were to summarize all of this, the ordering that is mentioned by these all scholars of usul, which we gain benefit from here, is that first we will try to work out the later opinion of the mujtahid. If we can't do that, then we will give preponderance to one of them using the preponderances of one of the scholars that have given that preponderance. And lastly, if we can't, then we're going to have to work out who do we follow. Okay, there's going to be some sort of reliance being done on a scholar who is reliable. Okay, and we follow that person who says this is the case or this is the ruling here. So he mentions this over here to discuss in regards to whether a mujtahid can have various opinions attributed to him. Now he then goes on to clarify the difference between ikhtilaf of riwayah and ikhtilaf of qawl. So there could be a difference in terms of transmission, but there could also be a difference in terms of opinion. So different in opinion, I'm sure everyone can understand by the wording itself, is different to a difference in transmission. So he goes on to expound upon this, because some people have conflated the two, stating that it's more or less the same and things like that. But he expounds, saying that no, they're not the same. Some people have clarified that the difference in transmission or the difference in opinion could come about for various reasons. He does go on to describe all of this in a lot more detail. I don't think it's too important, so I'm not going to mention each and every little nitty-gritty that he mentions, because he just go into a little bit of detail and then he refutes it at the end. So I'll just summarize it for you, inshallah. So he mentions that the difference in transmission could come about because he's quoting here from other scholars saying that the first reason could be because of hearing wrong. So one student heard it like this and the other student maybe heard it like that, And because they heard it wrong, that's why they then transmit from the Imam that the Imam said, for example, this is permissible. And the other student says, no, the Imam said this is not permissible. So there's conflicting two separate opinions being mentioned, attributed to the Imam. And that's because one of them clearly heard wrong. So for example, he says that one of them didn't hear the Imam saying la yajuzu. They didn't hear the la, for example. They only heard yajuz. So they didn't hear the la. So they didn't hear not jaiz. They just heard the jaiz part. Okay, so this can happen, in gatherings where you're listening to somebody for some time, your brain switches off and it turns on, your focus goes away, things like this can happen. So it's human error you have to account for. So this could be the case that it's a mistake in hearing from the student. Then he goes on to say that it could be because of different timing of the student. So that initially the mujtahid could have had one opinion and he would have been teaching that opinion. Then later, when his opinion changed because of various reasons, then he was teaching later on, a few years down the line, for example, to more students, and he was giving his new opinion. So obviously, difference in time when you studied with the mujtahid would have meant that different transmissions would have come about from him as well. Then sometimes there's a difference because one opinion was mentioned in accordance to qiyas, the analogy, and the other was mentioned in accordance to istihsan, the qiyas khafi in essence, or just generally a different opinion based on different reasons. So that could have been the case. Likewise, one ruling the mujtahid could have been giving in accordance to what the ruling actually is, and the other one could have been in accordance to what the caution actually is. So it's like a fight between taqwa and fatwa in essence. So in one ruling, he was giving the fatwa. On the other side, he was giving sometimes the taqwa, what the ruling would have been. So these are all different reasons. Ibn Abidin goes into saying that, but some of them, it's not because of the mujtahid. It's because of the listener, the transmitter. So that's their mistake, all right? Like the first one, the mujtahid themselves is not two qawls, two different opinions attributed to the mujtahid because of the mujtahid having a different opinion. So anyway, he gives his own one, Ibn Abidin, as well, for another reason as to why there could be a possible reason why there are different opinions attributed to the mujtahid is because of the mujtahid himself being unsure. So he says that maybe the mujtahid, whilst he was researching and having a discussion, a debate type discussion, exploring with the students certain opinions based on certain nusus. So at one time he may have mentioned an opinion, but he wasn't sure yet. Then he mentioned another opinion. He still wasn't sure which one to go by, like this. And then later on, perhaps he then chose one of the opinions. Or maybe he just never inclined towards any of their opinions. So that's why there could be a reason. He calls this taraddud from a mujtahid. The mujtahid having, sometimes he's swaying this way, sometimes he's swaying that way because of different, the way that you look at the nusus, the evidences from different angles, and this is the reason why. So anyway, from this, the conclusion of all of this, Ibn Abidin trying to present is what? That the scholars of usul who state that you can't attribute two different opinions because then there will be a contradiction towards the mujtahid, that one mujtahid can't have two opposing opinions. Ibn Abidin says, well, you can. We've discovered that a mujtahid can have more than one opinion. So anyway, this is a little bit of a side route or sideways that Imam Ibn Abidin is taking this discussion slightly. He's just opposing the usuliyun here. But from that, we can derive at least how to give preference to the qawl of the mujtahid, to the opinion of the mujtahid, when there are multiple opinions narrated or transmitted towards the mujtahid. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. So now to summarize what we've discussed today. So we firstly mentioned regarding when there is a difference of transmission, a different opinion mentioned in the books of the Dhawahir Riwayah, then we take the later one that was authored. So the one that's mentioned later, then that will get preference over the ones that were mentioned earlier. So that's why it's important to remember the order that the books were authored in. Then he goes on to mentioning regarding the book Al-Kafi. If you remember that Al-Kafi is the book of Hakim Shahid, which supposedly, as Ibn Abdin mentions, was meant to be a summary of the 6 books of the Zahir Riwayah. So therefore, it was meant to contain all the Zahir Riwayah, the manifest transmissions in it. But like I said, that it's not really that. That's not what Hakim Shahid did. Hakim Shahid actually summarized Kitabul Asl, the Mabsut of Imam Muhammad rahmatullahi alayh, and then hence Shamsul Aima Sarakhsi wrote a sharh of the Kafi, which is called Mabsut al-Sarakhsi, and that is a sharh of the Kafi, which is in essence a summary, a mukhtasar of Kitabul Asl, because Kitabul Asl is a voluminous work. So this is the correct understanding of this. When you check the books yourselves, then you will see this. And like I explained, this is all mentioned by later scholars. So he gave a lot of praise to the book Al-Kafi, Hakim Shahid's book, and he explains how Hakim Shahid did his work. And also in this, he also praised Shamsul Aima Sarakhsi. We definitely understand the caliber of these scholars was amazing, definitely speaking, but just understanding what it is that they've actually done. So this is important. Then he goes on to where the next part of the poem, he mentions that Imam Hanifa rahmatullah alayhi, sometimes he has various transmissions, many transmissions that are attributed to him. So why these transmissions came about, different transmissions, one reason mentioned was because there was a mistake by the student listening. They heard wrong, misunderstood, misheard, and hence they transmitted from that mujtahid something which actually the mujtahid didn't say. So that's one reason as to why an attribution to the imam or to the mujtahid may have been done. Second reason he mentioned, because of different opinion coming about in different times. So a student that studied later would have had the later opinion of that particular imam. Likewise, he mentioned that sometimes the imam would have given a mas'ala, a ruling based on qiyas, then sometimes he would have given a ruling based on istihsan. So it depends on what he based the ruling on, and that's why the ikhtilaf came about, the difference of opinion came about. Likewise, sometimes the mujtahid would have given a fatwa, and at other times he would have given a ruling based on taqwa. So it's the hukm versus ihtiyat in essence. So this is reasons, and Ibn Abidin adds another one because of the taraddud of mujtahid, meaning mujtahid having, he's not sure himself as to where to go here, this side or that side. So therefore he transmits both. And sometimes later on in life, he chose one opinion, or sometimes he didn't choose either opinion clearly. So that's why these are all reasons why a mujtahid can have various opinions. But when the mujtahid has these various opinions, what to do, we understood that. So first what we'll do is we'll look at the mutaakhir, the later opinion. Then if we can't find the later opinion, we'll look at the murajjah, the one that is preponderated opinion. And if we can't find a preponderant opinion, then we'll have to rely upon a scholar who has the capability to be able to give us something here. So that scholar will do a taharri as such. They will do an estimation. They will work out using various understandings as to where we should go. So you rely upon those scholars, and this is the practical way of what to do here.